I see where the connections is.
Good evening. Welcome to the November 4th organizational meeting for the Madison County School Board. At this time, I will officially call the meeting to order. During this meeting, we will be electing a chair and vice chair and scheduling our regular meetings for the next year. At this time, I will entertain a motion for the chair for the next year.
I move that board member Reggie Daniels be chair of the Madison County School Board.
Second.
It's been properly moved by board member Gibson, second by board member Bell, that Reggie Daniels serve as the chair of the school board for the next year. All in favor? 5-0, Ms. Bishop. At this time, I will entertain a motion for the vice chair of the school board.
I'll make the motion that Mr. Bart Offord become vice chair. Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved by board member Williamson, second by board member Bell, that Bart Offord would serve as the vice chair of the school board for the ensuing year. All in favor? 5-0, Ms. Bishop. Now, in your packet, we have a proposed schedule for the school board meeting from December 2019 through November 16, 2020.
Can
Yes.
I be here, Madam Chair, on that? You got a couple of things on the schedule. The last meeting we've got is November 16. That's an election year, and so the organizational meeting by statute is going to have to be November 17. Now, you don't have to have the regular meeting and the organizational meeting the same day if you don't want to. That's always been this board's preference in the past. If that's what you want to do, then you need to have that last board meeting needs to be Tuesday, November 17 instead of Monday, November 16. If you want to have the organizational meeting and the regular meeting on the same day. Now, there was two others that I want to bring the board's attention to. You've got a meeting set, or this has a meeting on January 6th, which is your first meeting back after winter break. That's your first Monday back after winter break. If you're going to have a meeting on January 6th, you remember our packets have to, and everything has to be posted. They're supposed to be posted 7 days ahead. That's going to be back during the new year when nobody's here. So staff's either going to have to come in over the break, or they're going to have to post the packet before everybody leaves in the middle of December.
Or cancel the meeting.
Or cancel the meeting.
That's what we usually do, is cancel the meeting. If something comes up that you really need to get to, you call a meeting.
Always have a special meeting. But remember, for years and years, we ran the district on one meeting a month. I mean, having one meeting that 1 month is no big deal.
And there's usually not that much business to do because you've been gone 2 weeks.
And then the other one, although it's a little different, is on the second meeting in March. The third Monday falls during spring break. Now this is on the fourth Monday, but again, you got that whole spring break before that. That's a little bit different because you get your packet out then the Friday, 2 Fridays before, which y'all may, but what we have done in the past is cancel that second meeting in March, but anyway, that's just up to the board on those. So anyway, like I said, the three things are the November, if you want to have your regular meeting the same as your organizational meeting, that needs to be November 17, 2020. And then the first meeting in January and the second meeting in March, if y'all want to do anything different on those.
We could, I guess, cancel that March 23rd, and if something comes up the week after March the 2nd that we need to address, we could have a special meeting on the 23rd.
I agree with that.
If nothing comes up, you would have been gone that next week. Nothing's going to happen that week.
And we're always available to get together if we need to.
So to summarize what I'm hearing, both December meetings will remain the same. Okay, we will have one January meeting. We will have 2 February meetings. We will have 1 March meeting, 2 April meetings, 2 May meetings, 2 June meetings, 2 July meetings, 2 August meetings, September First meeting will be on a Tuesday rather than a Monday. October remain the same. The second meeting in November, we will consolidate to have our organizational meeting and our standard monthly meeting at the same time. So rather than November 16th, we will meet November 17th.
Right.
With that, may I get a motion?
I make the motion to approve the schedule dates with the changes that you just stated for the coming year.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved by Williamson, second by Gibson, that we will approve the calendar with this noted changes. All in favor? Okay, so we have set the meeting for the next 12 months. And the standard time is at 6 o'clock, and the location is at the Madison County District School Board Meeting Room. Okay, well,
I'll make the motion to adjourn the organizational meeting.
Second.
okay. All in favor? Meeting adjourned, and this time we will set up, get your nameplate, and let's play musical chairs.
Welcome to our Monday, November the 4th, 2019 school board meeting. This meeting has been called to order. We will start with our amendments to the agenda. Okay, the pledge, that's right. Okay, first of all, we'll stand, our pledge for silent meditation, first of all. Thank you. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have a couple of amendments to the agenda. Item 2.1, the job descriptions will be placed under items for individual consideration, and it will be 5.3. So job descriptions 2.1 will be 5.3A, corrections, 5.3A under items for individual consideration. Also, we're going to pull from the consent item agenda 4.2, the permission to purchase seating for Lee Elementary cafeteria. That will be 5.1A. 5.1A. All right. Okay, moving right along. 3.1, comments from the public. Okay. No public comment. Consent agenda items. We have a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion that we approve the consent agenda items.
Second.
All right, properly moved by Ms. Williamson, seconded by Mr. Alford. Do we need any time for consideration or discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? 5-0. Items for individual consideration. 5.1, student field trips out of county. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we have the following field trips being requested. The Pinetta second grade wants to go to Legoland on April 1st, 2020. The Beta Club from the high school wants to go to Gainesville on November 5th. The high school power and energy students wants to go to Tallahassee on November 8th. The central school students, a group of central school students wants to go to Tallahassee. This is to a football game on November 16th, and this trip is being sponsored by Justice Solomon. It's a Saturday, it won't cost us anything. The band also wants to go to Tallahassee on November 16th to a football game, and that's being paid for by the band. And I recommend that we approve the trips.
One thing, and if on the band, the attachment for the band, there's a page 2 that's the MCHS senior class grad bash
Sorry about
that I
that.
think got put in there that needs to be approved separately.
Okay, yes, and yes, the high school traditionally does a grad bash grad night, and that's on April what?
April 25.
April 25th. They are requested to go to the Grad Bash at Universal Studios, and that's also on a Saturday.
I make the motion to approve the field trips.
Second.
Probably moved by Mr. Alford, seconded by Ms. Gibson.
Yes.
We any need for debate? All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? 5-0. 5.1A, permission to purchase seating for Lee Elementary cafeteria. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Lee Elementary School would like to purchase some new tables and benches for their cafeteria. And the reason we wanted to move this from the consent agenda to, because of the price is $28,162, and this is coming from the food account, and they do have funds to cover this.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve the purchase from the food account. It's not gonna come from general fund, and food services usually always has the funds to be able to do that.
Second.
All right. Properly motioned by Ms. Williamson, seconded by Mr. Alford. Would there be a need for further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? 5-0. 5.2, internal audit report. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, it's that time of the year, Mr. Boucher, the local CPA that we have engaged to perform the internal audits as mandatory, and he's gonna do a presentation to us.
Okay, thank you. Y'all should have received an electronic copy of all of our reports. You have that. And I might highlight a couple things in that, but primarily, as I customarily have done, is hand out a summary handout. Maybe makes a little bit more sense out of some of this, so I'll just pass these around real quick here. Okay. As usual, we conducted the audit, which is for the period ending June 30th for the year. for all 5 schools. We conducted the audits, 5 separate audits actually, in accordance with government auditing standards. And we follow governmental standards simply because the board oversees these funds in essence. So, and governmental auditing standards are really a set of standards much stricter than other types of audits. For instance, if we were auditing Madison County Community Bank, those standards are lesser than what governmental is. And the main difference is the compliance auditing, of which we have to report more details on internal control, and there's certain standards we've got to follow as far as how it's presented, and we get responses from the schools, you know, and so forth. So, and probably 75% or more of our auditing time is involved in just compliance, you know, with all the internal control flows and so forth. We spent a little over 235 hours conducting the audits for the 5 schools. In the electronic copy that you have, which is our official audit report, has the opinions of each of the audits in there. We issued an unmodified, or in prior years we may have described it as unqualified because that's older terminology, but basically it's a clean opinion on each of the schools, so which is a good thing. And we did not have any formal audit adjustments that were made. We've got some compliance issues that I'm going to go over. But before I do, I just want to highlight, I'm going to pull one set of the actual financial statements, and we're going to take a look at the central school, and if you can pull it up, that's fine. If not, you can just listen to my review here real quickly. In the formal report, we have a 2-page opinion report, and that, with all the dialogue, we stress the management's responsibility, we stress our responsibility as auditors, and how we obtain evidence and what our purpose of an audit is. You know, obviously we don't audit every single transaction of every school. You would not be able to afford us, you know, if we had to do that. So, and then on the bottom of the auditor report, we outline what the opinion is. We added a couple of new paragraphs this year as far as emphasis of matters, and one is the basis of accounting, which we usually spell out in the notes anyway, but we highlighted in the report that these financial statements are on the cash receipts and disbursements basis, which is a little different from GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, because these funds are different. They don't have accruals, they don't have liabilities and things like that. So, and then also we added a paragraph regarding the reporting entity, and basically that this statement presents only the Madison County's, for instance, for central school, just for the central school's internal funds. It does not purport the overall opinion for the overall school board, you know, per se. So, and then if you go into, let's say, if you're on central schools financials, if you look at page 3 and 4, and this is the same for all the schools, we outline all the individual funds, you know, such as whether it's an athletic fund or volleyball or PTO or whatever it may be, with the beginning balances, total disbursements, you know, receipts, and the ending cash balances. So you can see all those details. And then behind the actual statement of cash receipts and disbursements, we have the notes to financial statements, which I'm not going to get into details on that. And behind that is a separate report or separate opinion regarding the internal control. And behind that report is actually the schedule of each of the findings. And the handout that I handed out is actually a summary of these findings, and I've got some examples which I'll get into in just a minute. But the actual report not only gets into the condition or the criteria for us to determine what that condition is, such as Florida Red Book or whatever, a cause, effect, and there's our recommendation, and then we actually have to obtain the management's response to those recommendations. So that's all outlined in the report. So with that said, let's flip to the summary that I've got, and I'm going to go over some details. Let's turn to page 2 of the handout that I gave you. Overall, the findings this year were lesser than last year, and last year were lesser than the year before. The year before was probably one of the toughest audits that we've had. There were a lot of problem issues, and that's been cleaned up, over a period of time. For instance, if we look at in that box, you'll see in the bold total number of findings, Madison County High School had 0. And by far, they have the most transactions. They have thousands and thousands of transactions. They had total receipts of 554,000, but they had 0 findings, which is I think a plus for them. The Central School had 1 finding. Last year, they had 1. Pinetta had 2. Greenville had 3 this year. They had 4 last year. And then Lee Elementary had 1, and they were down from 2 last year. Greenville still tend to have the largest number of issues. And yet they have the smallest amount of funds. They only have 14 funds, whereas the high school has 53. But Greenville, for whatever reason, I think there's been, over the last number of years, some turnover in the bookkeeping position and so forth there, but it's improved, so that we're going in the right direction. So Greenville had 2 significant deficiencies. For the other schools, were all non-compliance. And the difference is, well, when we grade deficiencies and break them down into 3 categories. The first category would be considered a material weakness. We had none. In years past, we have. Material weakness is such a strong weakness in internal control that there's a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement or something can happen that it wouldn't go detected, and there's no other type of controls that could oversee that, so it's so significant. Then below that is a significant deficiency, and basically that's anything that still warrants the attention, but is not the same scope or same level as a material weakness. And then below that is non-compliance issues, and that's primarily what we have here. And that means non-compliance with either the Red Book or y'all's board policies. And depending on the magnitude of the findings, for instance, if one school had numerous problems with the same type of transaction, we'd upgrade it to either a significant deficiency or going up to a material weakness, depending on what it is. But if we found one finding and it was one issue, maybe a $25 check or something, we may have thrown it into the non-compliance category. Okay, so they're actually graded. Let's see. Let's flip to the actual findings. Let's go to page 3. At the top, Madison County High School, as I mentioned, there were none reported. The next school, the Central School, there was one issue there. It was an issue of non-compliance in which there was an issue with the bank reconciliation. And basically, the bank reconciliation report was well after the 15th of the following month before it was reconciled. And the issue with that is that if you look at criteria under the Madison County Central School, the criteria for that is the Florida Red Book requires bank statements to be reconciled as soon as they're received. And what does that mean? Previously, the board had a stricter policy than you have now. It's not addressed. And there used to be a date. Now I'm gonna come, when I finish all these, I'll go over some basic recommendations. But so that was the issue there. So the bank reconciliations weren't, or at least there were a couple that weren't timely prepared. Let's look at Pinetta. Let's just take, I've got some examples. Keep your hand there, but flip over to page 9. This is the example for the Central School. The date of the reconciliation was January 31st, or for that month ending, but it wasn't reconciled till March 5th. And obviously that's in violation of the, state Red Book. It's not.
I know you're going to go over this, but I zeroed in on your recommendation about finding out when the bank sent the statements and as a board, setting a date.
Right.
This is something we might want to do in the future.
That's right. And I'm going to come to that.
You're going to come, but I happened to see your recommendation.
Yeah.
I thought,
Because I think we do need to look at that. It's a little too ambiguous. Give them a finite date. that doesn't mean they're gonna make it, but we've got some more specific rules, you know. Pinetta, we had 2 non-compliance issues there. The first one is regarding insufficient approvals. Basically, a check was written without having 2 signatures on it. The state Red Book requires all checks must have 2 signatures. So coming down to the next area of non-compliance is basically turning in receipts, and I've got an example for that. And let me see here. The Red Book requires collections made outside of the school office to be turned into the school office no later than the next business day. So if you have a ball game or something on one weekday night, it needs to be definitely turned into the school office by the next day. And then Red Book goes a little further, and those funds must be deposited within 5 working days. And previously, the board had a very strict policy, and in fact, I think I even suggested we might want to loosen it because it was, I think, requiring, if I'm not mistaken, deposited by the next day, but the funds had to be turned in that day. And so there was an issue, let's say if you got Pinetta, and they take in something late in the day or some kind of after-school activity, how could they practically do it? So anyway, but let's turn to page 7 and look at the example for that. And you'll see that if you look at the actual deposit slip, the deposit was made on December the 18th, but collection took place on November 30th. So that's a good, 18 days later, clearly in violation of state Red Book. Let's turn to page 4, the next page over, and let's take a look at Greenville. Greenville had 3 issues. 2 were significant deficiencies, and 1 was a non-compliance issue. The first one involves, let's see. Okay, they had multiple instances where a person turning in the money to the school bookkeeper wasn't the same person that collected it. So it went through several hands, and quite often you're dealing with cash, sometimes checks, but it's usually cash. And so that's a problem with internal control right there. And so you just lack the accountability. So if you flip over to page 11, you'll see an example of what we're referring to. This is just one that we pulled. There probably actually were better examples, but this happened to be collection for Valentine dance, $165. And actually a student turned that in, and as opposed to the sponsor or the teacher, or whoever was actually responsible for the collection of funds. Let's go back to page 4. The next significant deficiency for Greenville, there was insufficient approval by school personnel. And this goes back to the dual signatures on checks. They had issues. They had 2 instances with that. And then also there's a kind of a backup to that, in that there's supposed to be check requisitions for the checks. And the problem with this one was that there was a check was dated before the check requisition. So in other words, and I've seen this happen through the years, I guess. They go back and kind of try to document what they've already done and then get things signed off. And sometimes they miss those dates. Someone's maybe not paying attention to it, which is not supposed to be the case. But if you'll turn to page 8, we'll look at the example of that. This is for the dual signature. This is a check to Jim Bob Printing with just 1 signature. It's $35, but clearly it's a violation of state Red Book. Page 5. This is again for Greenville. It's a non-compliance issue. And we've had issues with this before, sometimes with all the schools, that checks were drawn from one account, but they really didn't appear to be designated for that account. we had two expenditures were from the office account, but they're actually for school store purchases. But, and that's in violation of y'all's policy as outlined there. The next school, Lee Elementary, this involves insufficient receipt documentation regarding the monies collected report, which is the detailed cash report, which is actually turned into the bookkeeper. In this case, basically, the state red book just requires all monies to be substantiated by pre-numbered receipts and consecutive numbered receipts, reports of monies collected, and so forth. Then also collections made outside the school must be turned into the school office no later than the next business day. And remember the 5 days of requirement for depositing funds. So let's look at this one on page 10. This is an example of where money was turned in for the hurricane relief. There's no date on there. So, was that the next day, or was it 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, or whatever? We have no idea there. So, let's turn to page 6. And these are just kind of a summary of some recommendations that aren't necessarily in the audit report, but the area of most concern, as we highlighted on number 1, the area of most concern continues to be disbursements. They're required to have 2 signatures on those checks. They're required to have requisitions, and those were the main issues there. The second item, cash receipts, and that is depositing funds and keeping control of funds. Obviously, there's a reason for it, and I imagine at some point, somebody had told me a number of years ago there were some issues with one of the schools, some funds kind of being stolen out of a drawer because it stayed there too long. And so that's why, we have these rules. But number 3, let's back up to 2. As far as the cash receipts, I would recommend that y'all maybe take a look at your policies and procedures and put a finite date of when, if you choose that, if 5 days isn't sufficient. Y'all used to have something really strict, and then it just kind of reverted back to 5 days. And if that's your choice, that's fine. Some of these schools, if they're dealing with something that's collected over a period of time, 5 days or 6 days, and it's some small transactions, it's harder to do that, but that's a consideration.
What would you recommend for best accounting practices?
I would probably look at 3 days.
3 days?
Once collected and it's turned in, and if y'all want to go stricter, you can. Same day is almost impossible to achieve in all cases. Next day, you can, or you could look at 2 days.
You're saying business days?
Excuse me?
You're saying business days, 2 business days?
Yes, yeah. So I would look at either 2 or 3 business days. Either one would probably be fine. 5 days is a little too loose, but the state gives you plenty of leeway. But again, in some cases, we didn't have that. So. Item number 3 relates to the bank reconciliations, and I would recommend that the board kind of reestablish a policy of a finite date for the bank reconciliation, not just as soon as received. I would say by the 15th of the following month. Generally, the bank statements come to you by the 5th, 6th, 7th, or something like that. If y'all chose to have the 20th, that could be fine as well, as long as we have some kind of finite date. I'd put that in there.
Can I ask you, are any public entities using, a lot of private entities have accounts with banks where their QuickBooks system will just kind of go ahead and mate with the bank's computers, and it does like an instant reconciliation. Are any public entities doing that?
Yes, depends on the software, and even QuickBooks isn't an instant reconciliation. You still have to go through and reconcile and check off whether checks have cleared, but it kind of sets in motion for you, already. It kind of does a little bit of work for you.
Well, it tells you what's posted and what
Yeah.
happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, And it would tell you if you got any checks showing up on one that don't show up on the other. I mean, that's the.
Right, and you still have to clear checks.
Right.
You know, if they were outstanding from the previous month, which doesn't, it goes a lot faster and smoother.
I was just wondering, is that something maybe we should look at? A way to make that reconciliation a little easier for everybody.
Yeah, y'all could look at it, and I could probably talk with Andy about it and see if, what else could be done. You know, the software that's used with the schools is a specialized package.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's not just, because you're dealing with all these different funds.
I got you.
You know, QuickBooks would be,
That's
Yeah.
specific to your accounting software, and that's like
That's
if you have
right.
to have QuickBooks and the bank has a
That's right.
QuickBooks compatible. Okay, all right, I'm with you.
so. Let's see, the, item number 4, we feel like, and this is something that previously existed, but we feel like there ought to be some kind of dollar threshold for the superintendent to approve certain transactions. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was $2,500. I meant to look back at prior
We're
policy.
functioning on the $2,500 threshold right now.
Okay, and I don't recall that being actually in the policy manual though.
Okay.
But the schools are still complying with it.
Okay, we'll research that.
Yeah, because we, actually at first, before we realized it had changed, we were checking for that because we were still, I think, looking at the prior year's policy. So there were some emails like from the superintendent approval for, I think, band uniforms and some other things, you know, last year. So we checked for it, even though it's not a required policy.
Is that $2,500 a good threshold?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I wouldn't go any higher than that. Because these funds have a lot of small transactions and a lot of them, you know. You know, every once in a while you have a big purchase like band uniforms or something, or a big school trip that could easily go $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 easily. You know, or a big candy purchase or something could hit 5,000. So, and then the other thing that we've done from time to time in the past, we did in this past year, although I talked with Walter about it, and Walter, I think, was going to try to meet with him, and I'm not sure if he did or not, but Andy and I talked about it, whether Andy and I do it jointly or he does it or whatever, but it'd be good to bring all the bookkeepers together again, review all the policies in Red Book, review the policies for the school board, because y'all had change and so forth, and every once in a while, a good refresher would not hurt. So I would strongly encourage that to take place. So with that said, are there any questions that y'all got? I kind of went through the highlights quickly.
I have a question concerning the high school. With the note you made concerning the custodial credit risk.
Right.
The CDs, those are CDs at the high school, aren't they?
That's right.
And I want to seem to think, Ms. Joseph, last year we had this conversation concerning that something needed to be done with the money, because I don't know that we're in the business of having CDs, and this is $54,000 worth of CDs at the high school. I want to say that we, and maybe it was several years ago, maybe someone who was on the board could speak to that, remembering hadn't we had this conversation before about the CDs?
We did. Because they've been there for years.
Right.
They've been there since Randy McPherson was the football coach, is when they got put in place. He and Miss Miller.
Is that in the football athletic account?
Well, it's just a CD. It's 3 CDs.
Yeah, and it's not for a particular fund. Okay, it's just a conglomeration of funds for the high school. It just, and who knows how it got split out that way. You know, it could be consolidated or whatever.
I think it was maybe taken out in different years, like when they had
Very well could be.
extra money in the account, they took them out. And I want to say that back when we had this discussion, that I had asked that that if the money, I mean, I think we need to spend the money because I don't think it's a good practice for us having $54,000 sitting in a CD. But with something that's gonna benefit the students at the high school with some type of repair on something, or something that's gonna go back to the students, is what I'm
Well,
asking.
let me say this, those funds aren't for a particular fund, like PTO or, 10th grade class trip or something. It's kind of all meshed together. And you couldn't say, well, we've got these extra funds, we can go spend that. And that's where you get into the issue of one fund spending for another.
Well, how would we?
I think what you're saying is not that they're not for a particular fund, they are for many different.
That's right, that's right. For instance, it's just no different than the checking account. But collectively, there's $155,000 that's spread to 53 different funds within the high school.
So how will we be able to determine who gets what?
Well, so for instance, let's say at any given time, there's a balance in these accounts, always. Now, let's say if the school was to shut down and said, okay, we're expending everything, then you go expend it. But they're gonna be there and it's just a perpetual balance that changes. Now, let's say if the checking account, for whatever reason, there's a run on the cash by all these different clubs and so forth, then they could move money out of a CD and put it into the checking account. And it's probably just set up in the checking account because there is a large number of funds. I imagine at some point someone says, we should be earning interest on this. But the reality is you're not really earning interest because interest rates are so low. I mean, you see a 0.65%, that's less than 1%.
Well, one of the things that used to happen when Mr. Ruff had this was he would come up every year and he would tell the school board that we're ending up with a significant balance being maintained in that. We need to find an interest-bearing, some sort of an interest-bearing, I don't want to say entity, but something that bears interest because we're not getting interest for it.
Sure.
The problem though with that I always thought and I always said to him was, well, who gets the interest? Because that's really not the school bord's money. That's these clubs and
the interest gets spread to all these funds.
But how do you do that? Because the problem is if $100 of it belongs to 10th grade science club and 5,000 of it belongs to cheerleading and this, are we breaking out the interest so that the interest
you
goes
break
in
out
those
the interest to all the
proportions?
funds and spread it to all the different funds based on the balances as of whatever given
But I don't think
time.
anyone's kept track of it like that.
Yeah. For instance, let's say I just flipped over to Lee Elementary. They have a library fund of $2,200, and the total for the whole school is $24,000. You just take 22 as a percentage of the 24,000, and whatever, roughly 10%, and you allocate 10% of the interest to that fund, and you just spread it out. That's the way it works.
Well,
but I agree with you. It's for the amount of money that's coming in, it's peanuts. It's not worth it. And then let me mention one other thing. There's state statutes, and I'm not sure. There's state statutes regarding investments, and CDs are included as investments. I think the intention was for investments like there might have been some districts and invested in gold or stocks and things like that, but they threw CDs in there as well. Y'all currently do not have an investment policy, and so. In fact, I had a conversation with the supervisor of audits for the Auditor General's office regarding investments, actually. And y'all currently do not have an investment policy, which is fine. Some schools do, systems do, some do not. But y'all could always revisit this and just kind of move it all into checking just for simplicity. It's not really going to make a difference.
I think the problem is that it always gets really, really confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you say, well, who owns the CD? Well, the CD is owned by basically the school and the fund. And then if the CDs are cashed in and that money's put back into the checking account, you should be able to allocate all that out. And it's not that there's this CD out there that now there's extra money. That's part of the money that's accounted for in the internal fund.
That's right.
Because before we had this and it was, hey, we got $54,000, we can do great things. Well, the problem was
It's really not.
It's really not extra money.
Yeah. Just like if you had 10 checking accounts, well, you could. There's some school systems that may want to spread their money out to different banks just for political reasons or whatever, you know. And they may have checking account at this bank and a checking account at that bank, and it doesn't matter. It's all, you pull it all together, and all the funds, for instance, the high school, the 53 or 54 funds, they own all that money, however it's sliced or diced and where it's placed.
So, I mean, if you take $54,000 and you do 1% of that is $540, right? And so we're doing 0.5%, something like that. So, I mean, you're talking about getting an extra $270 that's going to be divided out among all of those entities. So you're not talking about a whole heck of a lot of money for any one entity. I mean, to me, I think it would be less confusing not to do the CDs right now. I think if you got us, if in the future CDs start paying what they did 30 years ago, and you got an 8%
And if
CD.
Mr. Ruff made that recommendation, probably when he was in practice at some point, particularly in the 80s, you could have CD rates of 10, 8, 9, 10, 11%
I mean,
at one time.
I think it'd be less confusing if we just put it all back into the account
I think so too.
and did it that way. And it's not that you never do CDs, it's just compared to the interest rate you're getting. It just doesn't seem to me like it's.
You could revisit it down the road. But what if y'all make that decision for the schools, then what I would do is probably just as they mature, you know, just, instead of going out and cash them in, because there could be a little prepayment penalty, not much.
Well, go ahead and tell the bank we're not going to renew these CDs. You can tell them that right now, and then whenever they.
In fact, the bank might just go ahead and release it and you could transfer
Because I
it.
think every one of them is a different period of time,
Right.
CD.
Right.
That's right.
Stair step. But that, it has been confusing, and it's shown up confusing, you know, many times over the years.
And I agree with you, Tommy, because we're not getting much interest to tie your money up.
Right,
I mean, it's tied up. You can't get it in between the time it matures.
absolutely, absolutely.
Any other questions? And as usual, if you do have questions later, feel free to give me a call or something. We can discuss it all we need to, so.
So am I hearing, that we need to have a conversation with the schools or with the CD with that to not renew their CDs?
And I think it was just the high school, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's just the high school.
It's not just the high school.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, I think there's,
Lee has,
yeah.
CD.
Mhm.
Yeah, Pineapple. Let's see.
Yeah, I think there's, I guess actually in my discussion, there's several recommendations, and since that came up, you know, we could put that in there as well, but I've got those other recommendations that y'all should consider at some point.
It was
It may be,
Pineapple with the CD.
excuse me?
I think it's Pineapple with the CD.
Pineapple's got one.
It just doesn't make sense tying up the money when it can be used, it can be used toward children.
But, and you're not getting any interest rate
Right,
type. I mean,
right.
that's the whole thing with a CD. You're giving up access to get a real good rate of interest. Well,
But we're not
now
getting
there's
a
so,
CD.
there's just,
And it's all available if there was a particular school project or fund, you know, for, let's say, for instance,
Pineapple
the
was
Sunshine
saying,
Club has $613. If they needed it, it's there, available. If they're ready for their project, or if they're ready for their class trip, or whatever it may
How
be.
about their playground?
Yeah,
Because that's what they need.
Do we
Yeah.
need to vote on notifying the bank, or just direct the finance director to do that, or?
I think you have the superintendent talk to the principals of the school, and those principals need to direct the bank to go ahead and not renew those CDs when they,
I will send them an email and say that they need to send confirmation when they, that it occurs.
anything else? I don't want to take up more of y'all time. I'm here as long as y'all need me, but any other questions?
I don't.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the internal audit report?
I move to improve the internal audit report.
Second,
Probably moved by Ms. Gibson, seconded by Mr. Alford. Will there be a need for discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Oppose? 5-0. Motion approved. 5.3, permission to advertise the student progression plan. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, Ms. Hill is gonna present that.
The district progression plan committee has met, we've gone through, we've tried to update the student progression plan using the statutes and things that are passed in the legislature for this past year. And so it is formatted a little differently. I tried to mainstream it where it's a little easier to find information. And so we just need your permission to advertise it for 30 days. We'll have some time to discuss it at a meeting at the end of the 30 days, but do I have your permission to advertise?
I'll make the motion that we advertise the student progression plan.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for permission to advertise the student progression plan. There'll be a need for discussion. All in favor? Oppose? 5-0. 5.3A, job descriptions. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, Mr. Chair, looking at our way of doing work and under the directions of the board, we decide to change our, to make it more workable, to change our chief positions to directors. And so we've changed the position from chief finance officer to director of finance, chief human capital officer to director of personnel. And I want to upgrade my curriculum coordinator to director of curriculum, and I think it will lead to a more efficient organization. And so I'm asking for these 3 positions to be directors.
Okay.
All right, after hearing from Ms. Joseph, would it be a motion for the changes for the job descriptions?
I move to make the directors a director of personnel, director of finance officer, and director of curriculum.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Will there be a need for discussion?
I just have one question concerning the finance, under qualifications. Master's degree from accredited education institutions, CPA preferred. Does that will cut people out who possibly could do the job that aren't CPAs? Aren't not,
Okay, I understand.
who are CPAs?
We can remove that preferred because it doesn't require you to have a CPA.
I would,
Okay,
I mean,
would you like to remove that CPA preferred?
it's me saying it. If that was the case, then the person acting as our CFO right now couldn't do the job. I mean, wouldn't be, meet the qualifications.
Okay, with that being preferred, it's not required to be a CPA. And we're not eliminating anyone because they do not have a CPA
Right.
certification.
I just think we eliminate a lot of people who possibly could do the job or apply for the job, who maybe would be good at the job with having CPA in there.
Is the master's degree required, or is that preferred as well?
Master's degree is required, CPA is preferred, so it's not required.
Any further discussion?
I agree with Mr. Alford. I think that would eliminate some good possibilities.
Okay, which part are you agreeing with? The
Agree to
CPA?
eliminate the CPA part.
Okay,
We've never, we only recently had that added.
okay, so we're looking at removing the CPA preferred completely, just scratch that.
Moving it as we speak.
Okay,
Is that the motion to say?
No.
That was just, that
Okay.
was,
That was-
Y'all need to amend your motion in a second, if that's what you want to do.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the Director of Personnel, Director of Finance, eliminating the CPA aspect,
Okay,
and the Director of Curriculum.
Second.
Properly moved by Ms. Gibson, seconded by Mr. Alford. There'll be a need for a discussion. All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carried. 5.4, staffing table.
okay, staffing table, Mr. Stallnaker, will you please go over that for quickly?
Mr. Chairman, in the staffing table, allocate or changes. I'm getting my agenda turned back over. You have several items. You have the staffing allocation plan, which the only thing that we changed in the staffing allocation plan, we changed the chiefs, took out the word chiefs and changed them to directors after your approval just now. We also changed the coordinator of curriculum to director of curriculum. And that is, I'm looking for the page number to tell you the exact page it's on.
It's on page 5.
Correct, it's on page 5. So you can see those changes that we made. Next item is at one of our meetings last month, we talked about the Central School giving up 2 Title I paras and being able to add 1 Title I teacher. At the second board meeting last month, I asked to put a hold on it because we had a couple of issues that we had to work through, and all of those have been ironed out. And at this time, I also have that instructional staffing table change to add 1 Title I instructional teacher at the Central School. That's going to increase their teacher capacity or teacher allocation from 71 to 72. Any of your questions, we're requesting approval for that. And that position will be used to relieve some of the overages in kindergarten.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Stallnaker? We have a motion for approval.
I make the motion to approve the staffing table.
Second. Second.
Been properly moved and second. Will there be a need for discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carried, 5-0. 5.5, personnel changes. Ms. Joseph.
Okay, our personnel changes, first thing, we've got a request to fill. We've just created the different director positions, so we need to advertise them, and we will be advertising the finance person without the CPA on there. But we need to advertise for a human capital officer, elementary education officer, and that was the position that Mr. Stallnaker talked about, director of curriculum and director of finance. And another elementary, why do we have 2 elementary? Okay. We're asking to advertise for these positions.
That last elementary ed should be middle school science. But you can't, if I may, Ms. Joseph, you can't approve the request to fill until actually approve the personnel changes, because that middle school science has to do a determination.
Okay, let's skip over and let's do personnel changes first.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the personnel changes?
I move to.
Motion to approve the personnel changes.
All right. There it is. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, properly moved by Ms. Bell, seconded by Ms. Gibson. There'll be a need for discussion. All in favor? Opposed? 5-0. Motion carried. Now, do we have a motion to approve or advertise the positions as presented?
Motion to advertise the positions.
Second.
All right, properly moved by Ms. Bell, seconded by Ms. Williamson. There'll be a need for discussion. All in favor, raise your hand. Second, Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we also have a list of school volunteers we need to approve. It's somewhere in the packet.
Okay.
It's not,
Yeah,
it's not online.
Where do you come from?
I don't have any.
It's under the personnel.
Okay.
It's the very last one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have it online.
Okay, school volunteers. It's under the personnel, and that's on the sheet I have. It's on the last sheet.
I make the motion to approve the personnel, the
Volunteers.
volunteers.
Second.
All right. Properly moved and second. Will there be a need for discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. All right, 6.1 superintendent items.
Okay, superintendent items, we've just finished with our FTE survey, and we got a good handle on it, and Ms. Hill is gonna give you a short summary of where we are with FTE at this time.
I was fixing to go to writing. Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
Mr. Barnes asked me if I would just update you on the FTE for Survey 2, which was in October. And so what we have done is Mr. Rowland ran us a report which had last year's Survey 2 information in the second chart. The top chart is from the day certain in October, and that's this year's FTE. And so, as you can see, we had a total of 1,270.21 FTE that the way that works out is it's a half of FTE for every student. Okay, so then in the February FTE, we'll generate the other half for the whole student. And so when we did our projections last year, I worked with Mr. Copeland, and what we tried to do was base those projections on what we had last year with a slight decrease because the trend shows that we were decreasing. What we actually have is we stayed the same, just a few over where we were last year. And so Mr. Barnes and I talked about that the trend had previously been that February FTE would be slightly less than your October FTE. However, last year, it was just the opposite. Our October FTE was less than our February. We grew throughout the year. Whether or not we'll do that again this year, we don't know. We know that we have registered quite a few students since FTE week who have moved into the district. And so, it looks like we'll go up again, but we just don't know for sure. But what I did want you to see is that we are right where we projected we would be. And so we won't have the same situation we had last year.
And we are spending our budgeting according to our anticipated income.
Any questions?
No. Thank you, Mrs. Hill.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
A couple of other things I want to talk about. Someone may have mentioned it to you actually what's going on. We're trying to go to a paperless payroll system. And what that is, we can now require persons to have direct deposit, but we cannot recommend any specific institution. Even our substitutes and our part-time persons, we're encouraging them to get direct deposit. If they do not get direct deposit, we are looking at, it's not definite yet, giving those bank cards, cash cards, whatever, putting their money on there. And we hoping that to happen with our January payroll, because majority of our personnel are on direct deposit, but we're still stuffing those envelopes every year, every month, and that takes about a day's worth of labor. And we're trying to become more efficient, and so that's what we're working on. If someone just utterly desires to have a paper check, we will make that happen. But with our Skyward, anytime the employee can pull up their records of how much your check is and all their records. So we'll be redundant with our efforts there.
Can we require all new employees after a certain day to be direct deposit? I mean, can't we say?
That's a union thing, and that's a change of their working conditions, and we are working, discussing.
But I mean, for new employees, I mean, not the ones there now, I'm
They
talking about.
still fall under the same union contract. We had a discussion in the union last week.
All right.
But
Some districts
we are working with them.
Now, we can, and we are gonna require all non-bargaining members, such as administrators and substitutes, to have
Direct deposit. Okay, the next thing, I'm becoming a big football fan. As you know, our football team made it to the playoffs, and we have home field advantage, and I really cannot explain that to you because I don't watch football. But we have home field advantage.
You're more comfortable at home, Shirley.
Okay, with that in mind, I know you're gonna love this last thing. Yes, we gotta think positive. Our life has to be positive. We're gonna make it to the state playoff. But the good thing about the state playoff, they will be in Tallahassee, Florida this year. And our division state playoff will be on a Saturday, so we will not have to miss school. That's Saturday, December 7th at 7:00 p.m. at Gene Cox Stadium. This week is a bye. That's your superintendent's input for tonight.
All right, Attorney Reeves.
No, sir, not unless you have questions of me.
All right, Ms. Gibson.
I'd like to remind everybody about the Madison County, Florida Storytelling Festival. This will be held on November 15th and 16th. It'll be held at the Madison County Agricultural Building behind O'Neill's. There'll be 10 local tellers. I know a lot has been done to help different students participate, and we look forward to this. I'd also like to congratulate the football team. I enjoy watching them from the band concession stand, which I'm there during football time. Thank you.
I don't have anything, except next Monday is Veterans Day, and so I'll remember our veterans and what they've done for us.
And I would like to say congratulations to the football team also, and I would like to congratulate the students that was on the AB honor roll.
I would like to congratulate the band in their recent FBA competition. They did really well, a vast improvement over the last, say, 4 years in going to the competitions and how they did. I also want to thank Ms. Gibson for her last year as chairman, truly for what she was thrust into with us imploding about January, and her standing there and standing up and doing what she needed to do, and
All the hours of meetings.
all the hours of meetings with DOE, Mr. Oliva, Ms. Pridgeon, of what all she went through that we just don't know about, how she had to fight for the district and fight for our 3 outlying schools. I do appreciate it. And no one knows until you've been in that role as the chairman of what she went through, and it's undescribable. And I thank you for your professionalism, dedication, and how you stood up to the district and stood up for the children of the district.
Thank you. It is a pleasure and an honor to serve on the Madison County School Board. I appreciate that, Mr. Alfred. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing that I'm requesting with December fastly approaching, I would like, again, a review, an instructional review of the iReady results. Also, I would like the percent of students in 3rd through 9th grade who were on the honor roll per grade level, and I would like to compare it with the FSA scores from the prior year to see how we are comparing with the number of students on honor roll versus the number of students in FSA. Because if we're grading with fidelity, it should be close.
Okay. You want that at the December meeting?
Whenever you can get it. I mean, I know we just had honor roll, but I don't know when the next iReady, I know they've had one iReady testing. When is the next iReady?
They have one in December. Okay, we can take the December's already result and compare it to last year's FSA results. Is that what you're asking?
No, I want to see the iReady results, but I also want to see the first 9 weeks of honor roll and compare honor rolls with last year's FSA to see, say for instance, in 4th grade, if you had 70% of the students on the honor roll and only 30% made FS3 or above on the FSA last year, then hopefully they've made gains, but the probability is just as to look at data.
Okay.
Could we add the AR to that also? I'd like to see how that's going in the schools. Accelerated reader.
Is anyone taking notes?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, we'll have it.
I know the majority of the schools are definitely using it.
Would that be it, Mr. Strong?
Miss Hill has another thing to mention. Ms. Hill, can you enlighten us about cursive writing, please, ma'am?
The program's here. The materials are here.
That makes me happy. Thank you.
Lastly, I just want to congratulate the football team for making it to the playoffs, and onward we go to hopefully another state championship.
That's it.
That's it.
I also wanted to thank Ms. Gibson for her service and her time rendered as the chair. And as Mr. Alford kind of recalled that time period, I almost felt like passing the gavel back over some.
We survived.
But we're so thankful for you and your service and all that you have done. And
Thank you.
I also wanted to encourage the district to continue to share the positive successes of the district via social media, in other ways. I know we're doing it, but I think we need to take it to another level. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of negativity that is, that comes with school districts and all, and I feel that it's very important that we kind of just let everybody know that we are, there are a lot of successes and good things going on in the district. Similar to how we end our meetings, if we can just kind of project that a little more. That's my spiel. Will there be a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, properly moved and second.